What was the dumbest, but legitimate excuse you said when you were late for schoolwork? My printer caught fire. Final paper due at exactly 11 a.m. I submitted it electronically before the deadline and showed up at 11:15, out of breath, and was told it was too late. Professor said I'd get a 0. I showed her the burnt paper and a picture of my burnt up printer sitting on the sidewalk I took with my phone. Got an exception and was allowed to submit. The bull got out and was hit by a gravel truck. I live in rural suburbs near a major Texas city. Think farmland being turned into subdivisions. This bull had a habit of getting out of his part of the field. Probably the most Texan reason to be late ever. Someone burned my parents' car. I don't remember if the teacher believed me, but someone had really stolen my parents' car, drove it until the fuel tank was empty, and burned it in a field. My dad once threw some monkey bread outside. It was winter. It froze solid overnight. I tripped and rolled my ankle on the way out the door, because a squirrel or something had picked it up and booby-trapped our porch. There were several geese around my motorbike, and refusing to let me on it. I ring my boss, and they didn't believe it until I came in with photos of Hal's geese hissing at me, because it was their bike now. I hate geese, they scare me. The house was in my way. Was behind a truck moving a modular home that had some sort of issue and was stopped. Obviously, if a car breaks down in front of you, you can usually just drive around it, but this took up pretty much the whole road. The cop had to direct traffic around it. I was only 15 minutes late, so it wasn't all that inconvenient, but definitely the strangest excuse I've had. Luckily, it happened after the invention of camera phones, those shitty flip ones, so I had proof. Me, boss, I'm going to be late. There's like 3 cars on fire on the highway. Boss, dude, I was just on the highway 15 minutes ago. There's no burning cars. Me, sends him a pic of the burning cars and paramedic. Boss, when the fuck did that happen? Me, I guess less than 15 minutes ago. I was heading back to school after lunch break and a guy who said he was a new student started talking to me. He was acting really weird, so I was all yeah, gotta go. He stole my backpack and refused to give it back. I chased this guy around for like half an hour. He was like 6'6", hard to catch someone whose legs are so damn long, but eventually he tripped. I got my bag back and made a dash for the school. When I explained to the teacher why I had missed half of class, she accused me of lying and sent me to the principal's office, where I ran into the giant weirdo, being escorted home by his parents. Because he was high on mushrooms. Seems that holding my bag hostage was just the tip of his iceberg for that day. The next day, he apologized for taking my stuff while he was high, and we were friends all through high school. I once emailed my biology professor that I wouldn't be able to make it to class to take an exam because I was out of pants. As a freshman, I jammed all of my laundry into our dorm's washer. I was walking around in athletic shorts while it was in there. I went and tossed everything in the dryer and set an alarm for an hour later. When I went back, all of my clothes were gone. All my pants. All but 2 or 3 of my shirts. All I had was what I was wearing. It was winter in Wisconsin, and I wasn't going to risk getting some kind of frostbite to take a test. I emailed my professor that all my clothes were stolen, and I wouldn't be able to make it to class. My sister ended up giving me a ride to the nearest department store and helped me buy some new pants, but it was a rough day or two. Was in Alaska for a few years. I lived in a duplex, but the only way to get to my side was up the only flight of stairs. My portion was above the garages. Had a moose hanging out at the bottom of the stairs, just sitting there. Had to be late for work because there was no way I was about to go down there. Called boss, boss understood, showed up about 2 hours later, and everything was fine. Was waiting for the bus when someone, douch, in a passing car threw an egg at me. Got me straight in the temple. Had to go home and clean up, was an hour late. People at work called me egghead that day. Had a student that had his mother leave a message for me that her son couldn't finish his papers since his eyes were swollen shut. I didn't believe it until he arrived to class with help navigating, because he had such a bad reaction to poison ivy that he couldn't see. I was a freshman in college back in 2004, which some folks may remember as being a rather compelling year in American politics. President George W. Bush was seeking re-election, and Senator John Kerry was challenging him. There was also a fellow named Ralph Nader running as an independent candidate, who, in addition to having a name which sounded rather like a schoolyard insult, was well known for having once appeared on Sesame Street during a special performance of the People in Your Neighborhood song. At least, that was how I knew of the man. Anyway, Mr. Nader made a point of visiting several college campuses whilst campaigning, and as luck would have it, he decided to make a stop at mine. I had never been particularly inclined toward attending political rallies and the like, but I did think that it might be fun to see a presidential candidate in person. My one concern was that the event was scheduled to end mere minutes before I was due to be in a class, and the professor who taught it had an incredibly strict policy regarding tardiness. If a student missed more than 3 sessions, with being late supposedly counting as an absence, they'd be unceremoniously kicked from the course. Still, I reasoned that I could leave the campaign event early, take a shortcut between a few buildings, and manage to make it with time to spare, and I would have, had it not been for an unexpected obstacle. The rally itself was somewhat less interesting than I'd imagined it would be. Peter Camejo, Nader's running mate, turned out to be much more compelling than the presidential candidate himself, who could have been mistaken for an animatronic representation of a dead tree, so I decided to duck out of the theater and make my way to class. Not wanting to disturb the people who were actually enjoying the event, I took a side door, which I'd hoped would lead me backstage, and to an exit. Instead, it led me right into the company of 2 Secret Service agents. I didn't realize who the men were at first, given that Nader didn't strike me as being a major candidate. There was also a suspicious absence of black suits. One of them was wearing tweed, in fact, or of guns being drawn, and orders being shouted, which may have thrown me off the scent. What I did notice was the way that one of the men approached me, told me that I wasn't allowed to be back there, and then stopped me from going anywhere else. Apparently, Nader had decided to make his exit not long after me, and I was barred from moving around while he was escorted out. I tried to explain that I was going to be late for class, but that didn't seem to matter. After I was finally allowed to leave, I sprinted across campus, only barely making it to my classroom. The professor, seeing that I was out of breath, asked me why I had been almost late. I replied by saying that I'd really tried to be there on time, but that the Secret Service had stopped me. My professor laughed and told me to sit down. Against my better judgment, I replied by insisting that I was telling the truth. "I know," the man answered. "It happened to me once too." He did not elaborate. I arrived at class around 30 minutes late, red-faced and out of breath. The reason why I was late was because I thought it was Saturday. Teacher started laughing at me and told me to sit down. When I sat down, someone kindly let me know that my jumper was on backwards. The city landscaping crew parked their truck chipper at the end of my driveway and piled branches up in front of it, and it took them 45 minutes to clean it up so I could get out of there. At another point in my life, while living in an apartment, the bicycle riding party went past the parking lot, and I couldn't get out until they had all passed like 30 minutes later. I was often late to school because of a train that ran across the only road I could take. This train never kept a consistent schedule and would oftentimes arrive only to slow to a stop and just sit on the track, blocking the road. I got detention so many times because of that train. I went home during lunch because my mom had something in the crock pot for us to eat. I picked it up to put it in the fridge, and the ceramic thing shattered with the food going everywhere. This wasn't a dumb excuse, but I had to go catch my dog. In reality, my pup was in the fenced backyard, saw a deer in the front yard, jumped the 5-foot fence, and chased the deer out of sight. I could have called him back, but he absolutely loves deer, so I just let him go. I then sat down on the porch and waited the 10 minutes for him to come back, but when he came over the hill and saw me waiting, he tried to hide. He thought he was in trouble, so he wiggled his way under the hedges, and that's when I had to coax him out by using his cat. Yes, my dog has a pet cat, as incentive. In his defense, he used to get in trouble for this crap all the time, but now I trust that he will always come back. I'm a very lucky man. I remember my old manager asked me why I was an hour late, and I just told her I was really tired and slept, and that made her laugh enough to let it slide. Although the real reason was, I ate an edible that I underestimated the strength of, and was high for literally like 2 days. I lived on a houseboat 11 or 12 years ago, and there was a pretty good storm, and the water rose high enough that the gangplank came off the dock, so we couldn't leave. My boss thought I was making it up until I showed him the pictures the next day. Was leaving a hotel to set up for a trade show. Near the entrance to the parking lot there was a pond and small bridge. Also, a large sign saying to yield to the ducks, violators will be prosecuted. The ducks did not want to move off the bridge despite me laying on the horn a few times. Had it on film, and showed it to the people who were waiting on me, and had a good laugh. The ducks moved when someone coming the other way got out of their vehicle, and ran at them. One time I had to miss a bunch of classes, and was late for one, because my cat Grizzly Bear maced me. Yes, you read that correctly. When I was living alone in grad school, my dad bought me Grizzly Bear mace, in case someone ever tried to break in. Well, one day I left it on the table with no cap, and no safety locked. My cat knocked it off. It landed on the trigger, and went off on me. It was so painful. I had to email a bunch of my professors explaining why I wasn't going to be in class that day. It took half a day to recover, and air out my apartment. Needless to say, they all thought it was hilarious and told everyone. When I got to school in the afternoon, students and teachers kept asking me about it and laughing.